So we want to thank everybody for joining today. The Geothermal Rising is here as we host our full steam ahead webcast series. We have Tim Lines joining us from Geothermal Wells and Oilfield International. And so thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today, Tim. Tim serves as the CEO of Geothermal Wells, which is a Texas startup. It was founded in 2022. And he's also the lead author of the 2023 report released by the University of Texas at Austin and Project InnerSpace about the future of geothermal in Texas, which I also had the privilege of being an editor on. So I read lots of Tim's work as we were editing that over the last several months. And Tim also has over the past 2 years been focusing on geothermal opportunities to accelerate decarbonization and the role specifically of the oil and gas technology transfer and workforce transition, and how that could play and how that will play in the geothermal industry. So in 1990, Tim co-founded Oilfield International, and Tim, I'll let you explain a little more about that organization and also your new company, Geothermal Wells. So with a few other little tidbits before we jump into Tim's really intriguing presentation today. One is that we do have an upcoming fly-in. The Geothermal Rising is co-hosting with Texas Geothermal Energy Alliance and Project InnerSpace and HEAT that will be in DC on June 5th and 6th. In the chat, we'll put a link to registering for that event. Space is limited, so we encourage folks to register as quickly as possible so they get their seat. And we also encourage folks to become a member of Geothermal Rising. This is this event, this full steam ahead webcast series is a new benefit for Geothermal Rising members and the geothermal community. And so if you are not a member of Geothermal Rising, we encourage you to join. And this is a really engaging and community that is growing very quickly and has a lot of interest and a lot of folks starting to get into it. So think about joining Geothermal Rising, and we'll put a link for membership in the chat. So with no more delay, we'll go ahead and I'll hand it over to Tim, and we can get moving. And so one more thing is, please put questions in the question and answer feature of Zoom, and we'll go through them and we'll answer those towards the end. And any folks who have asked a question, I'll bring you into the webinar and you can ask your question to Tim, and we will get those. We'll have an exciting conversation today. So with no further ado, Tim, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, all of you. And if I don't manage to answer all the questions, either because I can't or because there's not enough time, then again, just ping me an email and I'll do my best to answer them after the presentation. I'm calling you from the UK, so I'm 6 hours ahead. Well, it's now 1700 UK time. But so welcome to all the people in the USA and those from overseas as well. I put 3 logos up on this opening slide, and I hope they're now all self-explanatory. This is the company GTW that almost all of my time I'm focusing on now. Oilfield International is kind of what is on the tin. You know, it's a technical consultancy, competent persons reports. That's important because you'll see I mentioned that in due course. It's been going for about 35 years or so. And Project InnerSpace, of course, as I guess you know, are a prime mover and a catalyst for the Texas geothermal ambition. And Jamie Beard, who's the chief executive of that, has global vision as to what could happen with geothermal, and I rather support him in that. There's a lot here, and if I don't get through it, that's okay, because you'll get the slides afterwards, and then you can look at some of my thoughts and analysis. The first thing I can start off is say this simple question. If you look at the IEA's 2022 report, which in fact was used by the COP26 discussions to look at developing policy for the 2050 net zero ambition, then this is quite a notable. I've taken, this is not a graph in the document, but I've taken it from the tables. And as you can see, the vision in order to get to net zero is a tremendous reduction in the amount of oil that's produced and natural gas is produced. Not to zero, because first of all, you can decarbonize some gas use at source, but also because oil is used for petrochemicals and other such materials, and that will carry on. But the message is quite clear. And my key question is, well, there's 70,000 wells are drilled each year, or that's the plan for the next 3 or 4 years globally. And that's an awful lot of equipment, an awful lot of people who know what they're doing when it comes to drilling complex wells across the globe. And perhaps this is an opportunity for them to consider pivoting to geothermal, because as I'm sure you know, many of the technologies and the equipment that's used in the two industries are the same or very similar. And so what does the IEA think is the right way to achieve this net zero target? Well, I mean, there are perhaps no real surprises. You've got the wind and the solar and the bioenergy going up, nuclear doubling, and a bit of hydro. Well, there's an awful lot of hydro in the world now. There's not a lot you can do more. And this other one called other. And I suppose you won't be surprised to know that somewhere or another is geothermal, but it's so tiny that the IEA don't feel that there's any need to split it out, but I do. So that's where geothermal is. I guess some of you will have seen this. To me, it was very arresting. This just down there, that tiny little dot, that is the amount of fossil fuel energy in the crust in the globe. This is the amount of fissionable materials, and that's the amount of crustal geothermal. And I just want to make the point that in terms of crustal geothermal, now that goes down to quite a deep level, probably deeper than we'll ever reach. But there's around 20 to 30 million years of supply at the 2050 level of energy use, if you could deploy crustal geothermal totally. But the reality is, in 2020, this is how much electric energy and global and direct heat energy the globe actually used that was geothermal. So really, we are nowhere. And the question is, can we actually make a material impact in the next 35 years or so? One thing I'll just pick up on there was that the nuclear, they're looking to double nuclear in the next 30 years. That's the objective of the IEA was put out. And let's just look at that. Well, why? I mean, let's look at geothermal versus nuclear. In my view, geothermal has enormous advantages over nuclear in pretty well every category you can imagine. And you can read this as fast as I can say them, but they're reasonably obvious. It's certainly cheaper. It's an awful lot less baggage, both in the initial planning applications and the permitting and the views of the local population, and then of course in the abandonment, 60 or 70 years thereafter. It's also much more flexible in terms of load following, although the modern nuclear reactors do have greater load following than the old ones, where in fact you're at 95% capacity utilization, and that was it. But look at that, and also in terms of temperatures, we can provide in from 60 to 250 today quite easily, and a lot higher later. So that's kind of where I think there are disadvantages for nuclear. The most important is that the most of that energy is in hot, dry rock, and therefore we need to frack. And also the other thing is that for some of the technologies, there are fairly substantial parasitic pump loads. I guess 20% is the numbers that I keep working up. And of course, the last but not least is that a ton of water is worth nothing like as much as a ton of oil. And since generally speaking, you're deploying the same technology, capital, people, then when it comes to investment, then the rates of equity return are much lower. And that's the big challenge. And indeed, for a lot of reasons, the reason why it's been quite hard to get geothermal off the ground. But by no means, in my view, is it an impossible task. So if we look, for those that I don't know the audience I'm addressing, so I just thought I'd at least introduce you to what a comprehensive frac job looks like in the oil and gas industry. This is roughly what you'd see if you had a drone, which is this, of course, is above a typical Marcellus frac site, and that kind of gives you the eyeball view there. This is a pond which we use to then pump our frac fluids. Those from Fervo and others will know all about this. That's what we prop with. We prop with several things. Actually, we prop with bauxite for very high tensile stress regions, but generally speaking, just that kind of fine-grained sand. And I'm sure you've seen pictures like this before. And when it comes to EGS, then these are the kind of technologies that would be used for an EGS well or wells, like, for example, it will be happening at Forge in a month or two's time. So again, for those who are not so familiar with what this looks like subsurface, they're like penny fracs, really. Some of them are squashed a bit, but you can see that what we're trying to do is to create a squashed penny so that we get some height and we get a lot of length, so we can maximize the distance between our, in this case, shale wells, but the same is true for injector producer pairs. The advantage of fracking in shales or indeed with some clastics is that you get a natural barrier at the top and the bottom of those reservoirs, and that tends to help control the frack. Whereas if you're fracking in a granite or a basalt, which is fairly homogeneous, then the fracks tend to be pretty well circles, they're pennies, and it's quite hard to control that and make them more like a squash penny. Though there may well be people in the audience today who can tell us more about how that can be done. And it's perfectly commonplace, certainly in Iceland, to undertake these kind of frack operations very close to houses. This is a housing estate here in Reykjavik, the capital of Iceland, and they are fracking there. That's just about 750 meters, according to my attempt at Google Maps. So, and this is quite normal. I mean, there's a fairly significant and rigorous traffic light system, but we're looking at something like 4 on the Richter scale before anybody gets excited at all, because in Iceland they're pretty used to earthquakes anyway. So I know a human-made earthquake to increase the amount of geothermal heat for Reykjavik is no problem to anybody, really. One lovely fun fact I found when I was researching for this is another way of getting a magnitude of 1 on the Richter scale is to get yourself a 0.6 mile long freight train and rumble it down a track. And then if you're skillful, you can then deliver a seismic quake of 1.0, which is a very cheap source of seismic for a seismic survey. So there we are. There's a thought just to lighten the load a bit. So the principle, my real objective here is to say, well, what is it that the oil and gas industry have got that could potentially be useful to the geothermal industry? And I'm not going to focus on technology. I'm imagining in the audience there are an awful lot of people who know a lot more about how the geothermal industry's technologies are applied and to what extent oil and gas technologies could enhance those, and indeed vice versa, whether there are things in the geothermal space that could be used. But that's not my focus here at all. What I'm going to do is look at a wider picture about how we can use other aspects of the geothermal industry, the oil and gas industry, to help accelerate geothermal developments. So the first thing is scale. This is just Texas, and the reason I know these numbers is, of course, we wrote the Texas report. But there are just under 6,000 operators in Texas, and their production ranges from tiny to 475,000 barrels per day, with a total of 5 million barrels per day from Texas alone, and similarly 28 BCF of gas per day. And look at the range: small companies 10 million, large companies 2 BCF. The other thing is look at the sheer volume of, you've got a huge number of leases and a very wide range of how many the people own, how many different companies own. Now, what this is saying is that you have in Texas an extremely diverse market, and also you have extremely diverse ownership. Now, that is a huge strength. Because it means that you have a robust industry where no particular company or companies particularly dominate, no particular ownership structures particularly dominate. And so as things change with the years, or as circumstances change, then there is flexibility with the industry to absorb those changes, and the best companies and owners in terms of flexibility will then rise to the top and move the project on. Looking at scale again, roughly $180 billion of revenue per year from oil and gas. And look at transactions. There have been 16,000 transactions a year for the last 30 years. And this last year, that was $58 billion. This is for the USA, not Texas, this number. $58 billion of transactions per year in the USA between oil and gas companies and owners. That's the issues of scale. And also diversity of agreements is extraordinary. Some of these you may not even recognize, but there are all sorts of creative ways of making deals happen that are happy, where all the parties are happy to participate. Now, I want to just contrast that with what I know about the geothermal industry, and others you may be able to add several more entities to these two tables. But the thing that I look at here is, first of all, in terms of the traditional, by which I mean Nevada, California, Oregon, etc., these are the companies that come out when I look in the news. There are around 15 of them. And their ownership is private equity. There are a few public companies. Some are more diversified. Calpine does an awful lot more than just geothermal. Ormat's especially geothermal. Quite a lot of, as I said, PE. There's Macquarie there. That's kind of where it's at. So PE and private equity and a few listed vehicles. So nothing like the same level of variety, and of course nothing like the same scale. And in terms of the number of deals done, well, these are the ones I could find since in this 4-year period. And these are the ones I could find. So what's that, like 8 or 9 deals compared with what we were saying, 16,000 a year for oil and gas. So the reason deals are really important is that that's the way that companies or investors can make sure they're in the right risk category for their particular appetite, whether it's an equity or a debt play for them. And it's very important to be able to move efficiently assets on once they no longer serve your purposes for your particular risk category and your investors or whatever it is. And when you have such a low number of transactions, that's a bit of a block to moving to an efficient marketplace. And the actual value, I mean, if this were the approximate number of transactions, then you're looking at about $150 million a year, which again, you know, is very small compared with the billions we saw before. So that's the kind of characterization of the geothermal industry as I see in terms of structure. Let's look on. There's been quite a lot going on in the last 3 years, certainly since I've been waking up to this. And I expect a lot of these names you'll recognize. They're all upstarts, they're all new entrants. I mean, some of them also very big companies, but they're all getting the message now that it really is interesting and worthwhile deploying capital and expertise to geothermal industries. And as you can see, I mean, very big companies, I think is in the news a lot now. Most of the oilfield service companies are now doing something. Neighbours, you'll recognize some of these. But actually, I think Jamie Beard worked out there are over 200 accelerators and very small companies started up in Texas alone in the last 3 years. Some of those have risen to the top, as it were. Fervo, I think everybody knows, Criterion, Sage, and they tended to link up with some pretty big players. But plenty others are actually, you know, thrusting there as well. I mentioned a few there, and some interesting names like Google. And the other thing that's happening is there's this new structures are forming, and here's some in Texas. I'm relying on Texas because that's really the only place I have a lot of knowledge of what's going on in the USA geothermal sector. But as you can see, people are getting together and forming appropriate organizations for lobbying and for sharing information, universities getting together to share expertise. And the other thing is that Project InnerSpace, based on the success of the Texas study, has now, or is on the point of expanding that to 10 more states within the USA. So to try and roll out the same kind of detailed analysis of the prospectivity of each state and all the assets associated with it. So a very active and very exciting place to be. And I just wanted to talk about finance a bit when it comes to being a small company. Now, my view is that geothermal companies have pretty well the same sort of challenges that oil and gas ones do, except the fact the revenue stream is much lower for the same level of risk. But I wanted to make sure that at least I articulated here the kind of processes that small companies have to go through in order to get to a stage where they're material and can start doing projects. And most of this is equity. So this is where you have to give up part of the company or part of the project in order to attract investment from hopefully someone who is aligned with your objectives, maybe has a big balance sheet, and maybe has technology or other aspects that would support you. But this is the hard one to get going. Startup normally need $3 or $4 or $5 million to get going with to do something that will add value to an asset. And then once you've done that, then you can start saying, okay, we've got something that's certainly worth selling some part of. But in order for us to then add value to it, maybe drill a well or acquire a seismic survey or some other information. And that's when you go to a venture capitalist or venture funds, etc., and try and cut a deal where they would pay for a well or two in return for, you know, maybe 25 to 50% of the equity in your company or in the project if you've got a kind of umbrella structure. And so it goes on. Eventually, and really you're just looking at increasing scale. So there aren't very many companies in that startup list who are ever going to be at the stage where they can do a full field technology development for the next 5 or 6 years. So you tend to have to bring in the big companies. That's either those existing 15 or so who are on the West Coast, or indeed more recently the oil and gas companies, the service companies, etc., who've got big balance sheets and appropriate technologies to use. And so if I just look at some ideas of what kind of revenue streams we have at the moment from geothermal. I mean, I mentioned them for oil and gas. I don't know the answer to this question, but I tried to do a bit of homework and said, well, in terms of publicized deals where someone has struck a deal with a project and the price that they've struck it at has been publicized, 7 cents a kilowatt electric hour is kind of where they've been sitting for these 20-year projects. And we all know that there's roughly 3.6 gigawatts electric of installed capacity in the USA. And I've made the kind of rough assumption that there's a 70% capacity factor. And that would imply, therefore, that the gross revenue of sales from electricity is $1.5 billion a year. So a not insignificant sized number, but still rather small compared with, say, the oil and gas sector. And the implications there are that the balance sheets of those companies, those 15 companies, except for the fact they have big owners like Macquarie, etc., but the balance sheets of the operating companies will tend to be fairly modest in terms of the ability to massively increase in scale quickly. This is a very rough number, and I mentioned why that's the case there. ERCOT's selling ERCOT has got a 3.5 cents a kilowatt hour is the kind of number that they go for. So let's look at the other side of the equation. What about heat? So direct heat. So I had a look at the USA and said, okay, well, how much heat energy is other than ground source heat pumps? So more or less in the lines we're looking at. And I was absolutely flabbergasted to when I did the calculations. I did them 3 times. I couldn't believe it. But the actual gross revenue stream from the heat sales, excluding ground source heat pumps, which are very large, was $28 million if I assumed $4 per million BTU. So that's for the whole of the USA. So in essence, the USA is not interested at the moment in providing direct heat to any of these categories. And the interesting ones to me are industrial applications where it's not even, it's probably 0.2 or something. Certainly, so we all know about greenhouse heating, and that's why that's there, fish farming. But they're insignificant. Excuse me. And just to give you a bit of a contrast, if you look at China, similar sized economy, etc. They're looking at roughly $750 million using this $4 million BTU proxy for the value of energy in both countries. And you can see the big differences are this district heating run by geothermal energy and bathing and swimming. But again, when I look at the ones that interest me, like industry, again, there's nothing there, $30 million. Nothing, a little bit of farming and heating. So although they've got part of the story, they've only got part of the story. And so let's look at what the potential might be. And I'll explain why I'm passionate about heat and more cautious about electricity. Just to show you what China's been doing. There's nothing here that's a particular surprise, it's just the scale. Roughly 70 cities in China are partly or totally heated by geothermal district heat. And that might be, I don't know how many million people that is, but it's going to be very many millions of people. And these are rather pretty pictures about the kind of things we all know you can do with district heating. But what is interesting when I looked at why it has rolled out so effectively in China is actually the flexibility and the passion that the municipalities have in making this happen, to the extent that they revise the building regulations in their municipalities to ensure that geothermal district heat, which tends to be colder than coal-fired or gas-fired district heat, that the buildings will be able to accept that and still be warm enough. So these are air tightness regulations, insulation regulations. Now that's a pretty impressive thing for a municipality to do, and say, well, we will make sure we will fast track geothermal whenever it's possible. And actually, they got to the stage now where geothermal district heating on a dollar per MMBTU basis is cheaper than gas and coal. So it's not only is it clean, it's also cheap. And that's a pretty good result, and just shows what you can do if you start to get everybody working together within the circular economy you need. So why am I more interested in heat than electricity? Well, let's look at electricity for a moment, compared with its main competitors today, which are gas and coal within the USA, and nuclear to a lesser extent, and maybe more in future. But this drawing here, which I think many will you have seen perhaps in one form or another, comes out of a New Zealand paper in 2012, and I think it was something like 90 or 100, a very large number of projects around the world. They looked at the reservoir temperature as a source of enthalpy, and then they looked at the actual outputs. So after all the losses at the factory gate, how much electrical energy did you get for a certain amount of thermal energy which you produce from the reservoir? And this rather depressing graph here shows that you're looking at sometime, at even 180 centigrade, they were looking at some of their technologies producing 8 or 10%. And this, of course, is partly due to thermodynamics, Carnot efficiencies, the inefficient conversion of relatively low temperature heat into electricity. And of course, the reason that natural gas and coal have much higher yields, like 2 units of thermal energy for 1 of electric for natural gas, 3 to 1 for coal, is that they generate heat at a much higher temperature, 800 centigrade or something. And that's when you look at that, that's when the kind of efficiency, where the thermodynamic efficiency comes in. Now look at it for geothermal for direct heat. Well, if you could deliver steam to an industry or to another plant, then you've saved quite a lot of energy that natural gas or coal would have had to have invested in order to raise water above its latent heat evaporation. So if nature will provide you with steam, then the very least you can do is save a fair amount of energy for anybody who at the moment is using coal or natural gas to raise water at 30 centigrade up to 100 and something, or even higher. You can save them something for certain. And also, bearing in mind, you can also use direct heat for cooling as well. And the kind of model you could look at here is that you've got a geothermal plant, which then provides heat energy to an industrial consumer or a municipality. And that means that all of that problem of making sure that carried on working would be in the price of the geothermal plant. Whereas what happens at the moment, if you're using gas or coal or heating oil for driving an industrial process, is that you as the plant owner also have to make sure that you meet your gas safety regulations, and that you maintain the gas boiler plant, and etc. And that whole OPEX should be added to the actual price that you're paying for the natural gas, plus the transportation from Henry Hub or wherever it is. And again, I expect this is familiar to all of you. There's pretty well a whole range of different things you can do with a direct use heat, from very cold to extremely hot. And I invite you to your leisure to look at some of those. But I decided to take a look at one in a bit more detail, just to illustrate what an interesting area direct heat to industry could be. And I've taken the food industry in the USA and got some data from various sources with the Department of Energy. And just looking at these numbers, you don't necessarily have to have a feel for them, you just look at the size of them. So we're looking at roughly 67 gigawatt thermal, assuming 100% load factor, which is wrong, but it just gives you a kind of like-for-like number, and around 90 gigawatt thermal for the processing industry. That is just for food, okay? And never mind the other things which probably geothermal can't do very much for. And I just wanted, those are the numbers there. Now look at actually, if you look at all of the aquaculture, greenhouses and food processing that I could find within the Department of Energy website, and look at the total installed gigawatt thermal and compare it to those numbers, this doesn't even come to a half of a gigawatt thermal. So it just shows you how little of the potential for using direct heat from geothermal actually has been applied to these sectors. And look at the ranges. So these are eminently achievable by a lot of geothermal plants. Quite a lot of states are involved. You see this. I actually had a note from Pennsylvania, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, saying, well, why weren't they on it? But I actually couldn't find anything on it. But I did make the argument that there's an awful lot of milk pasteurization that goes on in Pennsylvania. And pretty well all that milk has to be heated from, I don't know, 60 Fahrenheit to 100, I don't know what the pasteurization temperature is, 140, 150 Fahrenheit. And at the moment, that's done either with electrical heating or it's done with natural gas boilers producing water, which then through a countercurrent heat exchanger then heats the milk up to the appropriate temperature necessary for pasteurization. And I thought, well, if there isn't, I can't think of a better and most obvious application for using geothermal heat that's above 140 Fahrenheit than just passing it into a massive milk pasteurization plant, with I think is it billions of gallons of milk per year are produced and then pasteurized just in that one state. So I think to an extent I've said some of these things. I just want to say how much more efficient it is, although the data in the USA, geothermal is actually quite a high emitter of carbon dioxide within the USA. And the reason is because there are methane co-emissions in most of the geothermal plants on the West Coast. But if you were go for hot dry rock, the kind of EGS or of course the AGS systems, then these emissions would drop from 19% to 1 or 2% of a typical fossil fuel one. It just so happens that the particular set of assets that are being developed within the USA have unusually high methane co-emissions. But if rather than making electricity with your geothermal heat, if you just use it directly for some of those processes, then the emissions from the carbon dioxide emissions just drop through the floor compared with any fossil fuel. And if you look at natural gas, for example, uses 15 times those for geothermal heat, and number 4 heating oil, which is the most common liquid fuel that's used for industrial processes, 21 times. So there's a huge potential target there to decarbonize industry. And it's and here's this is a nice one. I've just tried to find all the different potential industrial processes in the food industry and what temperature they needed. And then I tried to color code that here by saying, well, how deep would you have to be depending whether you had a low or an average or a high geothermal gradient, just so you who know very, very much familiar with these things would say, well, that's an easy well to drill, and therefore you could have a view about which of these particular applications could be accessed as low-hanging fruit. But as you can see here, there's an awful lot up to about 160 Fahrenheit, and it's pretty easy to get to 160 Fahrenheit, even with a low geothermal gradient. And typically the USA is around here, or even there sometimes. So you're looking at wells of 7,000 feet, which, for oil and gas operator or veterans from the oil and gas industry, and I'm sure from the geothermal industry, is a walk in the park. I mean, it's just nothing. The belly demands only planning and only a couple of casing strings, unless you're unlucky enough to be in a hydrocarbon-rich area and you've got to case off the hydrocarbons. It's a pretty simple thing. And even at these kind of amber levels of 270 Fahrenheit, you're not looking at that deep. I mean, 19,000 feet. If you're unlucky enough to be in a low geothermal area, that's not a big well, really. If you turn the corner, then probably you're going to be limited on the size of your horizontal lateral, maybe 3,000, 4,000 foot lateral only. But that's the low case. If you look at some more optimistic cases, you can get those temperatures quite easily at 10 to 13,000 feet. Every Haynesville well is 13,000 feet and could have a 10,000 foot lateral. So these things are right within the normal ballpark of the thousands of shale wells and wells such as that are drilled on an annual basis within the USA. I mean, 15,000 wells a year in Texas alone. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here if we kind of put the mindset on. The one thing I have realized and has been pointed out to me is, compared with the oil and gas industry, where all we have to do is know how to create a stable product and then transport it to the factory gate. So a natural gas to pipeline spec, an oil to pipeline spec or tanker spec, and that's pretty well it. Then you can say goodbye to it. And then because it's a commodity, you can just know pretty well what you're going to get for it. It's quite different when you're using geothermal direct heat to sell to industry or to municipalities. You've got to understand their industry and understand how they use energy in order to enhance their process or go through their process, which means you need to know a bit about how pulp and paper mills work, or in my case, pasteurization, which I went into. And until you know that, you can't talk sensibly to your customers, because here we're talking about having customers who you get to know and see eye to eye, which is maybe you put your geothermal plant a couple of miles away from the large milk processing plant, or even next door to it on the same land. So you need to know very much what they're doing, and they need to know what the limitations are and what the advantages are of what you can offer. And then together you can start to create some value. And I want to go to this. This is the Department of Energy has kind of got this. And if they're looking at this is actually now just passed. I think it was a couple of weeks ago. The initial submissions had to be in, but this is all about industrial decarbonisation and emissions reductions. Okay, and within this $12 billion, this is just what I'm saying. It's about saying, okay, what can the food and beverage sector or another sector, the pulp and paper sector, do in collaboration with the renewable energy, whether that's an intermittent supply like wind or solar, or a baseload supply like geothermal, either electricity or heat, get together, put together a project, and the Department of Energy will look at it and maybe fund it. And that's $500 million a project they're looking at there. There's demonstration projects for the different industries. So the Department of Energy are on this and very motivated and keen to just the kind of things I've been saying will actually happen, not exclusively with geothermal, but with all the clean energy sector. This is another one I liked. Actually, this is in Iceland, but the technology is there. But in essence, this whole shooting match here extracts carbon dioxide directly from the air, or 450 parts per million, whatever it is. But the thing is, what attracted me with this particular process, it only needs 200 Fahrenheit to regenerate the collectors. And so I thought, well, okay, well, you're right in the ballpark of really easy geothermal heat here. And it's expensive, $100 per ton CO2, and that's because you need 1,200 kilowatt hours per ton to extract that. But you're getting an idea of a potential application here, direct air capture. And this is just one of several technologies which have been looked at. Occidental, of course, are looking at their own technology here. So there are multiple applications which you can apply geothermal to. It's just a question of changing the mindset, so you can continually think about the customer and their needs, rather than, I'm talking to oil and gas people here, not to geothermal, rather than our typical oil and gas thing, which is once a product's out of the door, it's just a commodity, and leave it to someone else to transport and sell. Okay, one of the things I'm really passionate about, and I think it underpins the extraordinary health of the mergers, acquisition, and investment in the oil and gas industry, is a standard resource evaluation statement system. Now, this I happen to be mentioning one of the three here, which is the Society of Petroleum Engineers Petroleum Resource Management System, not least because as a competent person, this is the one I apply most within the oil and gas sector. But the others, the stock, the SEC, NYSE, and in Canada, I know we've got from Canada, COGI in Canada for the TSX. These are very similar standards. And what the most important thing about these standards is that they are understood and accepted by everyone in the industry, from the regulator, the stock exchanges, to the investors, to the operating companies, to the competent persons, the companies like Oilfield International, Sproul, the big ones in Canada, etc. And therefore, you have because there's a requirement whenever you conduct a major financial transaction in the oil and gas sector, you need a third-party auditor to make a statement of what your assets are, according to a very strict set of definitions. That means, because there are so many transactions, you have a virtuous circle, an enormous number of independent auditors. I mean, you probably know the big ones, Jolly McNaughton, in the UK, US, there are about 3 or 4, Gaffney Klein, I can't think of the names offhand, and a couple in Canada. They have huge competencies, and they have a lot of clout in the industry, and what they say goes when it comes to whether that's a reserve or a contingent resource, and everybody is happy with that. And what it spawned in the M&E and the mergers and acquisition industry is a whole series of valuation metrics where people, rather than going into the depth of the net present value or the net cash flow calculations, they start to say, well, we reckon that we want to sell this asset for $5,000 an acre because it's near, a particularly prolific shale production area, or we want this many dollars per barrel per day. $30,000 per barrel per day, for example, is a not unusual figure for the oil sector, or dollars per proved developed producing reserves. $20 would be a good number. Proved reserves, 12 or 14. So these numbers are in my head because there are so many transactions going on that there's a kind of rough understanding between buyers and sellers, or acquirers and acquirees, of what assets are worth once they've been rigorously categorized by a third-party auditor. Now that opens the floodgates for negotiations, because it becomes very easy to negotiate and realize and find out whether the buyer and the seller are within the right ballpark, and everybody, including their investors, has confidence about what the value is, what the range of the value is. And that also means that banks can do the same thing. And I've kind of written here, this is how a bank does it, works out what the borrowing base amount is. It goes to prove reserves profile, it discounts the commodity forward curve, it then calculates cash flow available for debt service, and it uses that to calculate something called a loan life cover ratio, and the field life cover ratio, and the reserves tail. And then from that, it calculates a borrowing base amount for a given tenor, 48 or 60 months, and a coupon above normally 20-year treasuries, which are 4% at the moment. So maybe 300 basis points above the 4%, so a 7% interest rate. It's all so easy. That's what I'm trying to get to. Get the point. Everybody knows the language. It's dead easy. We can all do it in our sleep, those of us in that part of the industry. And we have these kind of two-dimensional matrices that, again, completely familiar to everybody in the industry. Reserves, the most valuable, then contingent resources worth at most a tenth what reserves are. Prospective resources not worth very much. We haven't drilled a well yet, so that's why they're called prospective. And you have on here, oh yeah, so this is an increasing level of commerciality. Have you got all the permitting, for example? Have you got the money in place? Are you clear in your mind that you have the right capital cost estimate? And what's the range of uncertainty between the low case and the high case of what you're actually going to produce? That's where we are, common language. We all know it, and it makes life terribly easy in the oil and gas sector. Now let's look at the geothermal sector. There is one, at the moment, one standard, which is trying to gain traction. Professor Joy Falcone from Glasgow University has teamed up with the United Nations and more recently the IGA, International Gas Association, IRENA, and ESMAC, World Bank, to see whether this three-dimensional matrix structure, which is used for mineral resources and indeed for other renewables, is a good standard for the geothermal sector. And with a degree of success, September last year, the Queensland and Australia adopted this, their regulator adopted this as the standard that they should use. But that's as far as it's got so far. The most important thing I want to say is there is no consensus in the capital markets on what is the right resource standard. So this is a regulator. I'm talking about the capital markets because unless the capital markets are comfortable with that really is that much reserve, then you have this big barrier before everybody can agree actually what it is they're buying or selling. And so so how do we do it? I mean, still these transactions take place. So I just want to look at how are geothermal projects funded? Well, for those like Ormat, Calpine, Circ Energy, etc., it's also easy because they've got big balance sheets, they have internal skills, they can fund off the balance sheet and maybe there's some debt or some revolving debt or something like that. And so for them, and that's why they're so important to the future of the geothermal sector, is that they have no problem in putting together large sums of capital for new projects. Now let's look at the rest of the financial community who will be needed to engage if you're going to really accelerate geothermal as a major source of energy in the future. So private equity or new entrant public companies, all they can really do is hire a consultancy, Schlumberger's Geothermex or someone like that, and say, please tell us what you think of this. And so there isn't a common standard. So what you do is you use the same consultant, probably, for all of your evaluations of geothermal assets or of lithium assets or whatever it might be. And it has logic and it's consistent. And therefore, a private equity firm or can make a rational decision between various potential investment opportunities, and no doubt will do a good job. But if they need to syndicate, so if they're saying, okay, well, it's $500 million and we'll take 100, we want to offset the other 400, then what happens? So the other investors have to say, well, are they going to trust the original consultant who did the work for the prime, the cornerstone investor, or they're going to do their own work? Well, there's definitely a conflict between them because risk is being offloaded from the prime, the cornerstone investor, to the others. So it just means that you have a concern, and it might then be more time consuming whilst the syndicated investors decide that they need to get an independent report from another independent consultant who uses a different standard because there is no common standard. It gets worse with debt because with debt, unless there is a recognized standard that's available, then the lender will demand that the potential borrower pays for its own report. It certainly won't use the equity report because there's a clear conflict of interest between the equity and debt. So it will be doing, I'm looking at my time here. We're getting to, so again, you've got a conflict there. And with IPOs, we don't even know yet what stock exchanges are going to do with IPOs. So this, my point I want to make is it is critical that we have an accepted resource valuation standard, or else we cannot deploy capital at scale. So I'm just going to talk about a few things here, which is, now what I'm going to do is just get to the bottom line here. Equity really, the cost of equity really matters, because unless you have investors prepared to invest in early stage projects, then you're not going to get projects off the ground, and they will demand for a given level of risk a high level of return, and that's where the problem comes. And what I'm trying to do is say, well, the cost of equity for geothermal projects, for this reason mainly, which is you've got less commodity price risk than you do with oil and gas, and when you come to investor, you have to look at commodity price risk. Then, to cut to the chase, my view is that you can probably get away with a 12 to 15% equity rate of return, and that's attractive to investors pretty well across the USA. In Texas, less, because the subsurface is so heavily de-risked. People know the subsurface very well, and therefore the subsurface risk, which is a major component of the total risk an equity investor looks at, is to an extent lower. And also, the other thing about geothermal, because of the zeitgeist, is that you've got various other institutions who won't have even a 10 to 12% rate of return because demand on cost of equity, because they have other objectives, ESG usually. So municipalities, not-for-profits, direct use customers, people your geothermal company might go with, maybe a paper mill, for example. Military and critical infrastructure, where the reliability or independence from a grid is important. All of these could well look at cost of equity well below 10%. And if you just whiz back to what it is for wind and solar, I mean, the cost of equity there is less than 10%, even 5%, which I think is irrational. I can't see how any investor, unless they have some other uplift, could accept a 5% rate of return on their equity from a solar project. So the last thing I want to look at in view of the racing time is, I won't look at that slide, although I commend you to look at it, because it's so interesting to see how you get from 36 billion tons a year of emissions at the moment to zero in 2050, when the population has gone up and the GDP per capita goes up. Yet somehow the IEA have one route at least for doing so. I would just say that we're looking at $100 trillion of capex, something like that, which is around $10,000 per person in terms of the globe, so the 9 billion people. But my view is this: that's what the IEA think, that by 2050, geothermal may, at a pinch, contribute less than 1% of the global electrical energy mix. And my demonstration is that if you deploy the oil and gas infrastructure, all those rigs that will no longer be used for oil and gas, if the IEA route to zero is adopted, by just drilling 35,000 wells per year, which 17.5 are injectors, 7.5 producers, using current oil and gas and geothermal technology, we could get to 12% of the prime energy supply for the globe by 2050, just by drilling that many wells per year. The global number of wells drilled in the oil industry is around 60,000. So we're not even looking, it's 70 here, yeah. So not even the total, even half the total for that one there. If you allow some new technology to be deployed, there's an awful lot of good things going on at the moment. NOV with their particle impact drilling, other people looking at drilling much deeper and hotter, which then of course increases the megawatt per well, megawatt electric per well, because you're at a higher initial temperature. And if you double the number of wells drilled per year to roughly what are being drilled at the moment in for oil and gas wells, you could probably achieve over 75% of the primary electrical supply purely from geothermal energy. And that's across the whole globe, of course, so it's the primary. So, and the thing is, of course, across the whole globe, there's geothermal energy. So you lose the political risk associated with some countries having a lot of oil and gas and others having none. The same picture, or better picture, in fact, is due with, if you look at the direct heat, roughly 1% is what the IEA think. It's really easy to get to 22% or 20% just by drilling 15,000 wells a year, and just about the average yield per well of geothermal heat. And if you then invoke new technology and double the number of wells, you can pretty well supply all the direct heat in the world that's connected or can be connected to a geothermal well. It's that potentially impressive. And if you look at the amount of that's all I need to say, I think. If you look at the amount of heat we've got in the globe, then that will give you some indication that this is well within the capability of the Earth to provide for hundreds of millions of years. Thank you very much.
Tim, that is amazing. And those last two slides there are absolutely phenomenal for the geothermal industry to be a player at that magnitude in our energy mix. So thanks for your presentation today. Everyone, if you do have some questions, please enter them into the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to some of those. So we'll start off with a question from Sarah. Sarah, I'll bring you into the conversation, and you can ask your question here. You're welcome to leave your camera off if you want. It's up to you. You can use your own discretion for that.
Hey, Sarah.
Hi. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for your presentation. I have a question regarding fishbone stimulation technology for geothermal enhanced system targets. I just want to know, is there any used fishbone technology for geothermal targets in Texas or no?
I don't know. I think, Sarah, I did mention at the beginning of the presentation that I wanted to steer clear of technology. That I think you'll probably find on this call there are an awful lot of people who might better answer your question, but I'm not that person. So my background, I'm a reservoir engineer and a competent person, and applying finance and such things to the geothermal sector.
Well, and so if anyone on the call does have an answer for Sarah's question, feel free to reply in the Q&A section to Sarah. Malcolm, we will move to you next with your question here about repurposing oil and gas. A great question, or sorry, oil and gas wells, I should say. So you can go ahead and ask your question, Malcolm.
So Malcolm, which bird is that?
What question is that?
Which bird is that? It looks like it must be a swan of some type.
It's a black swan. Yes, my title is Black Swan Detector.
Perfect.
Yes. So my question is about the practicality of repurposing oil and gas infrastructure. And I know you weren't really talking about technology. It's more the category, that sort of approach. And in particular, how you think investors might be how their thinking might be adjusted based upon, not having the cost of drilling.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, as a matter of fact, I had a section on that which I took out. So I don't think I can find it quickly enough to not hold up these things. But I will write to you separately if you send me your email. But the issues I've got, I mean, certainly Canada had a good look at this. Alberta had a good look at this, and I think they found that they thought something like 5 to 10% of the wells were potential geothermal candidates, the oil and gas wells. I mean, I'll just say the fairly obvious things from a technical point of view, which is if you're looking as an investor to repurposing oil and gas wells into geothermal, then let's look at the condition of the well. So how well excuse the pun, but what is the condition of the well, and how confident are you of that condition? The second thing I'd look at is who keeps the liability for abandonment and for any pollution that's occurred within the oil and gas sector. The third thing is, does the owner of the land still want the same royalty? So if you're looking at 1/8 royalty for an oil and gas well, which is quite a low one nowadays, 12.5%, then there needs to be a renegotiation about the royalty because you won't be able to afford it and make money. The fourth thing is that if you look at typical wells, they've got either 2 7/8 or 3.5 inch tubing, normally maybe in a 5.5 inch, or if you're lucky, a 7-inch liner. And then so you might pull the tubing, but you're still going to be constrained in the flow rates that you can get from the well by the fact you've got a tubing of a certain diameter. And of course, you're looking there at hydrothermal wells. So we're looking probably in the first instance at water flood wells, which is a very attractive idea where you've got like a 5-spot pattern with an injector in the front and 4 producers on the outside. you already know what temperature the water is coming out at because you've been separating it from the oil for the last 10 years. So that seems to me the easiest and earliest hit. And I would say probably that should be done by the operator, the current operator and owner, because then the liability issues, etc., will go away because all they're doing is extending the period before they have to abandon the well. So those are the sorts of things I'd initially be thinking about as an investor. The calculations I've done on oil and gas wells suggest to me that they really aren't very great candidates for power generation, mainly because the temperatures are quite low and also because the flow rates are much, much lower than you'd expect to see in a typical geothermal well, which might be producing 25,000, 30,000 barrels a day, something like that. Whereas you're not going to get that even from a high perm well, unless it's in the Middle East in a carbonate reservoir or something. So that I think is the issue. It's not that you can't do it, but I think the nearer it is to being on the plate, which is still operating, not too much corrosion of the well bore, well understood reservoir, and keep the existing operator and just install some equipment which allows you to extract some heat from the water in the separator rather than cooling it or disposing of it. That would seem to me the most attractive oil and gas project. But of course, there will be specific cases where it's a lot better than that. But if you're going to get 125 kilowatts out of a well, you're doing pretty well, I think.
Great. Thanks, Malcolm, for that really important question. So next, Tim, we have a question from Jeff. Jeff, I'll bring you online and you can ask it. It's about your investment class that you're considering and venture capitalists and what kinds of returns they look for in investments. So go ahead, Jeff.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. So, talking to venture capital, they expect triple-digit returns. And sometimes more, and they have about maybe a 10% success rate or less of things they invest in. So when you talk about the risk profile of geothermal, that's kind of the rub. So given that I agree with your numbers. Just 12 to 15% is a pretty good analysis, and therefore, who are the investor class that you are targeting?
Oh, okay. Well, I think I tried to give you some idea here. Okay, yeah. So we're talking about Jeff. We're on the same page here. That the problem is the initial capital, and how can you get to reasonably high levels? Well, this is where I've come to. I had a conversation with a fund manager who said that he would be looking for 50% real terms rate of return. He would, and the reason that you're not seeing the multiples that you're referring to, I mean, you and I are the same industry. I mean, if you're going to get a farm into into an asset that hasn't been de-risked, you can be looking at 5 to 6 times your money within 6 to 9 months, or else you're not interested. And that's the oil and gas way. But the arguments I'd make is that it is a less fundamentally risky business. And the key reason is when you and I do our sensitivities for saying what is the extent of risk between the low and the high case, commodity price is always the one that you flex the most, because that's the one that can trash your project or cause it to be very, very, very profitable. And the second is capex or schedule, and the third is the resources in the reservoir, or the second and third can change round. But the argument I've got with the financiers I've been talking to is that the one thing you can get rid of is the commodity price risk. So in the capital asset pricing model, all of that beta associated with volatility of price is pretty well removed, because once you've built the wells, then both the investor and the customer have a stream of revenue where they know what the price is per million BTU, and that is one way you're de-risking it. It's not for everybody. I think the other thing is you're pushed into selling the ESG card, and selling the card that says if you are a resource investor, then because of the zeitgeist, you're going to be finding it harder and harder to attract your LPs. And then on such that, if you start to look at these kind of projects with lower returns, but still leverable, we can leverage these projects to 80%, no trouble at all. And the coupons will be 300 basis points above Treasury, 20-year Treasury. So you can get to a return on equity if the project's successful in the 30% by that kind of leverage. But I'm with you, it's a problem, and that's why it hasn't rolled out globally. The best place to do it is Texas, because or areas in the USA where you've got good hot areas like Texas City, and at the same time you've got an extremely good understanding of the subsurface, so you can move out the subsurface risk because you know roughly what's going on down there.
So we want to be respectful of everyone's time. So we have one more question here from Andrew. It's about, we don't mean to end on a negative question, but it's about exploring why IEA's estimates on geothermal's potential are so low. So Andrew, you have the floor now.
Hello, Andrew.
Hi, I don't have much to say other than, that was my question. Why do they think that the contribution of geothermal is going to be so negligible? Thank you.
Historical precedent. We had 50 years of geothermal. That's the first thing I'd say. The second thing is costs. If you look at the estimates that they used when they did their economics, we challenged them. The geothermal technical section within the SBE asked representative of the IEA why, once that report, that 2022 report came up, we asked them why it was so low, especially since they were sitting in the geothermal technical section themselves. And the answer was, well, we did use 2012 data because that was all that was available. And if you want us to revisit our views, then you need as an industry to provide us with the data that will persuade us that what we said is not optimistic. The other thing I think, but also if you look at the logic and the arguments that I put forward, those weren't within the IEA's assessment. So they weren't thinking, well, what will the oil and gas industry do with all its immense capital and resources, which are ideally suited to two things, drilling wells for carbon sequestration and drilling wells for geothermal. And so I think that by taking a broader global view, you can become more optimistic. But ultimately, it has to be a decision of the oil and gas companies to deploy those resources and capital in geothermal and obviously CCS.
And I'll also add, Andrew, from my own research in this space as to why energy technologies remain stagnant, there are social and policy reasons that geothermal is still a somewhat nascent technology, and that the geothermal industry does not receive the same types of support from governments, both in the United States and abroad, that all other energy technologies have received over the last 100 years. And so without those government programs that reduce the risk of exploration or help geothermal move across that commercialization gap, geothermal will continue to struggle. So it's something that Geothermal Rising, along with Project InnerSpace and Texas Geothermal Energy Alliance and SPE, are all working together and aligning ourselves to try to change that, so that geothermal has a seat at the policy table in capitals and both state, provincial, and country capitals around the world. Well, everyone, thank you very much for joining today. We appreciate you taking your time. Tim, thank you so much for joining. This presentation will be shared with everybody along with Tim's slides, and you have his email address in the chat. Feel free to follow up with Tim to dig more into his research and read Chapter 7 of the Texas Geothermal Energy, the Future of Geothermal in Texas report. That's Tim's chapter, which is a phenomenal read. So, Tim, thank you very much for joining us today.
Enormous pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.